Thanks, y'all, for tuning in to another video. I really have been seeing a lot of posts about no one ever tells you how hard the healthy relationship is after the toxic one. And it's true, no one really talks about how much more difficult the healthy relationship is after you've been in a toxic one. But also, why does that happen? So, one of the things that I noticed is, especially from being in toxic relationships myself and then being in a healthy one, is that inside of those toxic relationships, you play a role that you've always known. And so it's really, um, even though the situation is difficult, it's really easy for you to know how to be a character inside of that narrative because it's the role that you've always played. And so you go into that toxic relationship and you act exactly as you've always acted. You fawn so that the other person is happy. You people please. You do all of these things because your focus is solely on what they need and what you need to do in order to keep them from being chaotic. And so you know that role, it's the devil that you know, it's the role that you've experienced your entire life. So when you get into this healthy relationship, what ends up happening is the focus now turns on you and the person that you're in a relationship with. So it's this partnership and you're focusing on the partnership and you're focusing on the two people inside of it. And so when you've only ever been in a relationship with toxic people, whether it's the narcissist or it's somebody who has narcissistic tendencies or it's somebody who's abusive or it's somebody who uses coercion and manipulation, etc. If you've only ever been in that relationship, then that relationship only requires the previous version of you who's always able to function inside of that relationship. When you get an unhealthy one, it requires you to show up in different spaces. It requires you to show up differently because you don't have to hide everything that's wrong with you and place a spotlight on the other person. You actually have a role to play and a space to play that role inside of this. You're not a supporting character anymore, you're one of the main characters. And so you have to learn how to navigate that. But the other thing that happens is inside of co regulation, your things are exposed inside of you, right? And so in relationships that you've been in the past, it wasn't really co-regulation. It was you regulating their emotions and then you sitting inside of yourself with your own. And then you got into this healthy relationship and now you're like, "Oh gosh, I have to be able to regulate with another person and also experience this for myself and understand and know myself." And so when you're alone or when you're with the person that you were in a toxic relationship with, you can just kind of exist in that space, knowing what to do, knowing how to prevent things from happening because you're used to it. When you get into that healthy relationship and you have to co regulate, what starts to happen is exposure. And it's not just negative exposure. So it's exposing your growth in areas that you are able to utilize the tools that you know. And it's also exposing the areas that you may need to continue to grow. And you won't ever know that until you're in a healthy relationship. And so when it exposes the areas where you've grown, it will look like this. So maybe you learned some things in your previous relationships because if you were anything like me, when your relationship wasn't working, you went straight to the Gottman Institute and you started looking for all the ways to manage conflict and to be in a healthy space and all of these things. And so you changed the way that you talked to the person, you wrote scripts for the way that you were going to text them, etc., just to make sure that they were in a happy space in the relationship because if they were happy, then you were happy because you were people pleasing inside of the space. And even with all of that information, when you try to use the tricks and tools that they gave you, it didn't work because the other person wasn't healthy. And so then you deem that, well, maybe these things just don't work. Or as I was told in a previous relationship, those things might look cute in the books, but it doesn't mean that when you actively try them, that they're actually going to work. And it's just because that person was unhealthy inside of our relationship. And so when you try to use those things, the tools that you know inside of your healthy relationship, what you'll find is they actually do work when you're with someone who is open to receiving those things inside of a relationship. And so you can try the pause before you speak and before you respond. You can say, "Hey, I don't think we're in a good space to have this conversation. Maybe we should come back to it in about 30 minutes when we've calmed down." And it actually works because you don't have somebody following you around saying, "This needs to happen right now. And those books are crazy. And we can't resolve the conflict unless we do it right in this space. And I don't want that hovering over our heads." You don't have that happening because you're actually able to utilize the areas that you've grown. And for me, inside of my healing journey, I couldn't figure out those things and actually heal until I was by myself to figure out what parts of it I needed to heal and what are some other things that I needed to learn. Then when I got into the healthy space, I realized, oh, all of these things do work when the other person is receiving them as ways to make our relationship flourish. And the areas that it shows you that you need to grow are some things that you were never even able to have exposed in those other relationships because there wasn't enough space for you to exist in them. So you're focusing on other people's needs and flaws and things that you might have to be malleable to be able to fix. But then when you get by yourself, none of those things exist. So when you're co-regulating with this new partner, now you have to figure out, okay, like, how do I feel about this? What are my thoughts about what is my opinion about this, right? Where you maybe before you just had to stifle that. And so one of the areas where this opportunity for growth showed up for me is asking for help. So in my previous relationships and even in my life in general, I've always felt burdened if I had to ask somebody to do something for me because I just felt like I would rather do it for myself than deal with the aftermath of either that person not doing it in a way that actually it requires in an effort that it actually requires to get done, or dealing with their feelings of contempt after they had to do the thing. And so it was either do the work or do the work in the relationship after that creates some sort of rupture because I've asked for something to be done. And when I got into a healthy space, that became a point of frustration for the other person, not angry frustration, just like, will you please let me help you? And it's really hard for me to give up that task to another person because I've never had or felt like I had that space where I could give it to another person to do and it would actually get done. And so inside of a healthy relationship to that person, it looks like, well, you don't trust me enough to do the thing. And you don't really look at me as a partner because you won't give me the thing. And so where before that hadn't even come up as something that I needed to work on or deal with, now it's an issue or a concern because the person wants to help and they want to be in a partnership with me. And so, I mean, it's something as simple as, hey, were you able to pick up those Capri Suns for this birthday party? And we're there 2 hours before the birthday party. And he's like, oh, I forgot. I'll go grab them now. And I'm like, no, 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 don't grab them now. It's fine. We can just do water. And he's like, no, we said we were doing Capri Sun. Let me go get the Capri Sun. Because I feel like that's going to be burdensome. I don't want him to do it. And so he goes and does it anyway. And then he comes back and he's like, just let me help you. And I have to learn how to hand over tasks and allow somebody to be a partner to me because I've never had to do that before. I just had to do everything on my own to make sure that the relationship wasn't chaotic. Instead of worrying about what other people might want to do for me because they want to be in a partnership. And so it's really about learning the things that are being exposed about you and why they exist. And it's hard because you feel very naked in those spaces because the you that you knew in a relationship up until this point is the you who was in a toxic relationship. So the you that you know now in a healthy relationship is really like learning a whole new person because you're able to have an opinion, you're able to have these conversations, you're able to utilize the tools that you know, and they actually work. So then you're like, oh my, now what do I do? And so something that you really have to focus on and think about is what are your triggers? Because you never actually got to experience your triggers before, because if it was triggering you, you just had to shove it down for the sake of making peace inside of the relationship. So it's being able to learn your triggers because now your triggers have been exposed. And then understanding, is it actually triggering you because of what's happening right now? Or is it triggering you to be better? Right. And so in that space, is it triggering me that he wants to take this job from me? He wants to go get the Capri Sun. Or am I triggered to grow? Am I triggered to be able to learn how to let someone help me? And that's what starts to happen. A lot of our triggers are attached to things that happened in the past. And so therefore we create a narrative where that person who's in the space of being our partner in this narrative, we start to give them and assign them the characteristics of the person who was in that space in our narrative in the past. And so, okay, he didn't answer my text within this time period, so he must be mad at me. Well, that's something that triggers you, but that trigger exists because in the past, when he didn't answer your text, he was cheating on you, or he was mad at you and he wasn't telling you what he was mad at you about. And so when you start to think about this, you're like, oh, so Am I being triggered? Yes, but am I being triggered by the present, or am I being triggered to be able to grow in this area, to be able to grow beyond what I've experienced in the past? And if I'm being triggered, have I learned the tools to be able to deal with my trigger inside of this space? So, like I was saying, when I went to the Gottman Institute and I learned all of these tools, in my previous relationship, I would bring those tools and he would be like, well, that's not going to work here because that's just written in a book. Where in this relationship, I can say, you know what? That triggered me and I'm not really sure why. So let me get curious about where that came from. And then we have a conversation. You know what? I assigned this to you when that really isn't you. It's something that I'm dealing with from the past. So let me do that over because I don't want to give you those characteristics, not who you are. And then that person starts to learn those abilities too because he's been in toxic relationships and so therefore he has areas of growth as well. And so that happened inside of this relationship where I said something and I don't even remember what it was. But we had talked about, the ability to approach yourself with curiosity and not assigning the responsibility of your triggers onto somebody else. We talked about that several weeks ago, and then we had this conversation, and I said something, not even realizing that it triggered him. His in natural instinct was to say, "Can't believe you just said that," right? But he didn't say anything inside the conversation. We had the conversation, we went on to later, and then he said, I used that tool, and here's what happened for me. Inside of the conversation, you said this, and in me, what I heard was this. And then when I heard that, I said, well, is that what she said? Or is that actually just what I interpreted as? He has this whole conversation with himself later, and then he realizes that I was being assigned characteristics that were existing from his past relationship. So then he said, you know what? That didn't trigger me because you said it. I triggered me because of the interpretation that I made of it when it's not actually even what you were saying. So we had this whole conversation around, I use this tool and it really works. So let's talk about it. And then I was able to say, you know what? I could completely understand how that would have sounded like based on your past, what I meant. And it really wasn't. And here's what I was saying inside of that. Does that still trigger you? Because I don't want to be a trigger for you. And we have a whole conversation around that. And so that would never have existed in my toxic relationships. It would have just been like, I can't believe you said that. You're a horrible person. What kind of person says that to somebody? And then it would have been me trying to make up for something that was never even my intention in the first place. And I never even would have been able to question my intention because I would have been so busy trying to fix the problem that I created, which maybe wasn't even a problem in the first place if he would have accessed where it came from. And so it does expose you, it exposes the other person. It allows you to really investigate your triggers and realize that maybe they aren't current triggers, that they're remnants of the past, and allow yourself to question, why does that still exist for me? And how might I grow and move past that thing? And the thing is that there's a beauty inside of this space, this healthy relationship, and the way that it exposes you. It makes you feel naked, it makes you feel seen, but then it also makes you feel seen because we've spent so much time trying to stifle ourselves so that other people will approve of us and other people will tolerate us in the toxic relationships that we were in the past, that we forget that that's not the way relationship works. This person is supposed to love you, and if they love you the way that they're supposed to love you, then what you're trying to figure out is how you can do a dance together that is harmonious as opposed to this push and pull that you're used to in the past. So when you get fully exposed, when you're able to be fully naked with this person, then you are able to uncover opportunities where you can work on some things that you didn't even know were an issue for you. Opportunities where maybe you felt like that thing was just in you, but really it was just your attachment to all the things of your past. And so when you ask yourself, why is it so hard to be in the healthy relationship after the toxic one? It's because you're rewriting a narrative and you're able to become an actual main character in this narrative because you're not playing a supporting role anymore, but it's a partnership of the two main characters. And when you're in this partnership, you have to be able to focus on the partnership and the relationship, but then also each person. And to be able to harmoniously move between what's happening with each of you to make the relationship still sustain itself. And that's really difficult when you're used to operating with the same tools that you've always had to have. This person's not requiring you to be a people pleaser. They're requiring you to be a communicator. And if you've always been a people pleaser, you're going to have to work on your communication skills. This person's not requiring you to fawn and do everything that they want. They want you to pick the place you're going and to plan the trips and to do some of the things because that helps them to feel like you're in a partnership, you're working together. And so you're going to have to learn how to, instead of just fawning to make sure that everything is okay and shrinking, how to be bigger because they love all those parts of you. And so, if you're in a space today where you're in a healthy relationship after a toxic one, I hope this message helped you. If you're still in a space where you're out of the toxic relationship and you want to be in a healthy one, just know that doing the work now to expose all of your hurts and get down to those core, deep, and inner wounds is only going to help you in the future to be able to play the role that you need to play inside of that healthy relationship. If this message helped you, please go to my social media platforms and like those pages, follow me on those pages, and also don't keep this information to yourself. Click that like and subscribe button, share this video with your friends, whether it be on social media or in other places, people who might need to hear this message so that we can help each other be released from the bondage that we've been in before. Because learning this information is great, but sharing it with other people who may need it to be able to heal and be released from their experience will, especially this video, stop them from perpetuating that toxic relationship cycle and be able to identify and activate their own giftings and blessings inside of a relationship so that they can attract that in the future. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you again next time.